So we're back in year 2000. It's after the presidential election, and we still don't have a president. Now, 49 of the states and the District of Columbia, they have tallied their votes, but we don't have a candidate with the 270 electoral college votes needed to be declared the presidency. So you have George Bush on one hand and Al Gore on the other, all waiting on one state. And the rest of the country is like, hey, Florida, buddy, we're kind of in the middle of something here. Could you count your votes and let us know who the president is? Well, Florida took its own sweet time, and the Supreme Court of the United States had to ultimately step in and decide who the next president of the United States was going to be. You're going to learn all about Bush v. Gore in today's episode. I'm Joshua Roberts, attorney at law, and you are watching Lawyer Up. Today we are continuing in our Epic SCOTUS Supreme Court of the United States series on wonderful cases that have come out of our nation's high court. In today's episode, we're talking about Bush v. Gore. We're going to talk about the parties, of course, would be George Bush and Al Gore. We're going to talk about the facts of the case and the problems that Florida had in trying to tally their votes for president. We're going to talk about the decision that was reached by the Supreme Court, why it made the decision it did, and of course, why the case is epic. Because the Supreme Court ultimately decided who the next president of the United States was going to be. If you enjoyed the video, hit that like button. If you got something to say, you got a question, put it in the comment section below. If you like epic Supreme Court cases or legal information in general, then I would encourage you to subscribe to the channel. And last but not least, I love it when you share me on social media. So let's get to the case. We're back in the year 2000. We have survived the Y2K craze at the beginning of the year. We had gone to the polls and voted in November of 2000 as to who we would like elected president. 49 of the states and DC all came up with the totals for that particular jurisdiction and the electoral college votes that go along with that. Unfortunately, neither George Bush nor Al Gore had enough to become the next president of the United States. So all attention turned to Florida, who was the last state that still hadn't given us any results. So whoever won Florida got their 25 electoral college votes, that's how many they had back then, and would become the next president of the United States. Now, almost 6 million votes were cast. And after they were all run through the machine, George Bush had a lead of under 2,000 votes. So this is wicked close and razor thin. So the state law mandated that these ballots be run back through the machines and counted again. And when that happened, Bush was only ahead by about 300 votes. It had become razor thin. Now, you would think after the second recount and Bush was still ahead that he would be declared the winner. But he wasn't, because there was one major problem. And that was that there were about 170,000 votes that could not be counted by the machine. The problem was attributed to their butterfly ballot system. If you're not familiar with the butterfly balloting system, essentially it's a series of flat pages, and they flip over one by one as you go from issue to issue or from candidate to candidate when you're voting. Now, in between these pages, there's a little strip of exposed ballot, if you will, a little cardboard ballot that you slide into the machine. Now, as you turn the pages, you have a stylus in your hand. The part of the stylus that you hold is plastic with a little metal, basically a nail poking out of it that you use to punch through the card. Now, here was the problem with the ballots from Florida. Over 60,000 ballots were called undervotes, or no president was clearly selected on the ballot itself. And what had happened is that people apparently didn't put the ballot in correctly or they didn't push down hard enough. Because in voting, they hadn't cleared the perforated chad from the ballot itself. And so when you have the ballot without the perforated section completely dislodged, the machine doesn't count it. So about 60,000 ballots were called undervotes, or they didn't register a vote for President of the United States. And then you turn to problem number 2. About 110,000 votes were called overvotes. This is a scenario where 2 presidents were chosen. And this was a result of a confusing ballot. The way the ballot was configured, it almost looked like you needed to vote for both the president and the vice president. So you would punch out 2 holes for your selection. Unfortunately, there were presidents on both sides of this butterfly ballot. So when you punched the first one of the president and then you punched the one below it, it kind of looked like you were voting for that person's vice president. You were actually voting for the presidential candidate on the other side of the page. So we have a lot, over 100,000 overvotes, where the person had accidentally voted for 2 presidents. So when you have a race that is down to about 300 votes separating the 2 people, yet there's 170,000 votes that really hadn't been counted, well, litigation ensues. And so the Florida Supreme Court says, we got to go back and we got to look at these ballots manually. We're going to have to hand count these uncounted ballots to figure out how in the world these votes should be counted. And in Florida, there were actual hand recounts that had begun in 4 different counties. So as the hand recounts had begun, George Bush said, whoa, wait a minute. And he appealed to the Supreme Court of the United States. And the argument George Bush made was that there wasn't a clearly established standard, statewide standard, from which these individuals could determine whether a vote had been cast or not. Now, originally, everybody agreed that the overvotes really couldn't be counted. When you have 2 selections made, those kind of had to be thrown out. But you could take a real close look at the undervotes and try to determine who that person attempted to select for president. Now, the problem was that George Bush said is that how do you know? Where do you draw the line? So some of these ballots were dimpled, where they were just basically pushed in. Is that enough to indicate the person's preference for president? Or what if only one of the corners was punched out? Or maybe only 2 corners? So the issue is, at what point does a ballot cease to be a ballot and become a vote? So the argument Bush made was that, hey, there's no clearly defined standard. We don't know if a dimple is enough, or if 1 corner out is enough, or 2 corners out, or 3, or if it has to be completely dislodged. And since we don't have a uniform standard by which to count these votes, that violates the Equal Protection Clause of the United States, and we have to stop the recount. And ultimately, the Supreme Court agreed with George Bush. In a 7-2 decision, they said, Florida, you had until December 12th to give us the total amount of presidential votes from your state. And guess what? It's December 12th today, the actual day that the Supreme Court rendered its decision. And they said you had until today to give us a decision. The recount hasn't happened, so you have to go with whatever tally you have today. Now, there were dissenting opinions and justices who said, no, we should give them more time to count these votes, to develop uniform standards. But the majority said, nope, we're going with your tally today. And so the Florida Secretary of State certified the election results as they existed, and that was having George Bush win by 537 votes. That gave him the 25 Electoral College votes from Florida and a total of 271, making him the President of the United States. Now, interestingly, after the election was certified, the media made inquiries to take a look at these ballots themselves. And various media outlets actually went back and they looked at these undervotes and they came up with their own tally as to how they would have been counted had they formerly been counted by the individuals working the election. And you would think we would have an answer, but some media outlets said George Bush still would have won. Others said, nope, Al Gore would have won. Ultimately, the only thing that was clear from the presidential election of 2000 in regard to the state of Florida was that they needed an entirely new voting system. So that's the episode on the case of Bush v. Gore from 2000. I hope you have enjoyed it. If you have, hit that like button. If you've got a question or a case you would like me to talk about, put it in the comment section below. If you haven't subscribed, I would ask for you to subscribe to the channel. And last but not least, I love it when you share me on social media. This was another installment in the Epic SCOTUS case series. My name is Joshua Roberts, attorney at law, and you've been watching Lawyer Up.
Send lawyers, guns, and money.